My boyfriend's best friend called me dumb and unsophisticated for him. Revenge, so I flipped the script and destroyed her PhD career in 1 week. Have you ever been pushed so far, so systematically undermined, that you found yourself meticulously planning someone's complete downfall? Because I did. And the terrifying part, I enjoyed watching it unfold. Our life together, Leo's and mine, was a well-oiled machine, comfortable and predictable, like the precise calculations we both did every day. We were aerospace engineers, after all, building a life as carefully as we designed satellite components. We'd spent 3 years in this rhythm, cooking, talking about our research, helping each other with challenges, just soaking up each other's thoughts. We met at a game night, instantly bonding over hiking films and then the shared language of satellite components and aviation consulting, until one evening, a ghost from his past waltzed in and everything started to unravel. It was at a reunion when Leo met up with his high school classmate, Sophia. She was pursuing a doctorate in theoretical physics, and almost immediately, she started joining our hangouts. At first, I really did. I'd ask her about quantum physics, genuinely interested in her work. But she'd respond in this patronizing, overly simplistic way, like she was talking to a 5-year-old, then turn to Leo with a sugary sweet smile and say, "Wasn't it cute how I tried to understand?" He'd chuckle, and a cold knot would tighten in my stomach, because I saw it. She only did it when he was watching. Dinner dates became a performance. She'd steer every conversation to her studies, then apologize for boring me with clever people stuff. Me, the person with a master's degree, I just sat there, my smile feeling tighter with each apology. Then came trivia night. The theme was space exploration, my literal job. I answered every single question correctly. Everyone. Sophia turned to Leo, a dismissive flick of her wrist, and suggested I probably just memorize facts without truly understanding them. And Leo, he agreed. He actually suggested we should give other teams a chance. That stung. Oh, it stung. But I let it go. I tried to anyway. What I couldn't ignore was Leo starting to question things he'd never doubted before. When I fixed our home router, something I'd done countless times, he asked if I was sure or just lucky. When I helped him optimize code for one of his big projects, he suddenly needed Sophia to validate it. She, of course, informed him there were mistakes. There weren't. Not a single one. The breaking point hit like a physical blow at Leo's workplace party. I was deep in conversation with his supervisor, discussing propulsion systems, my wheelhouse, my passion. Sophia glided over, introduced herself as Leo's girlfriend, a lab technician. The supervisor, who clearly knew my name from my work, assumed I was the engineer behind the heat management study he admired. Sophia actually laughed. "It must be someone else with my name," she chirped, because the math on that paper was rather sophisticated. My blood ran cold. I corrected her, my voice low and tight, but she'd already grabbed Leo by the arm and pulled him away. In the car ride home, the quiet stretched between us, thick with unspoken anger. Then Leo broke it. He mentioned Sophia was concerned about our compatibility. He said relationships work best when people are intellectual equals, and that I could be happy with someone on my level. I just looked at him. "What level is that?" My voice was barely a whisper. He elaborated, Sophia. He said, "Noticed I struggled with abstract concepts and relied too much on practical application." This woman, this new woman, had convinced my partner of 3 years that I was too foolish for him. I asked him if he agreed with her. He shifted uncomfortably. He said she'd made some reasonable observations about how our interactions were superficial. Superficial. We had literally spent the previous week dissecting the philosophical implications of delivering consciousness to Mars. I understood exactly what was happening. But I decided right then, in that car, that I was going to play the long game. I started appearing perplexed whenever Leo tried to explain something. I'd ask Sophia to slow down when she spoke, as if her brilliant ideas were just too much for my little brain. I even bought a stack of popular science books and left them artfully scattered around my apartment. Sophia ate it up. They both did. They started referring to me as Leo's nice, uncomplicated girlfriend, and all the while a cold, meticulous plan was forming in my mind. I began working on something extraordinary. Sophia's doctoral supervisor was Dr. Fitzgerald, a man with whom I'd collaborated on 5 papers over the years. He had no idea she was even friends with Leo, let alone that she was actively undermining me. I approached him with an idea for a new project, incorporating quantum applications in satellite navigation, a field I was well versed in. He was intrigued, and we started working together. Sophia had no clue that her own mentor was emailing me her research papers to review, believing my practical knowledge could help shore up her theoretical work. And oh boy, was there trouble with her research. It was derivative. pure and simple. She'd repackaged existing frameworks with complicated math that only served to cloud, rather than clarify, her points. Her code was clunky, inefficient, and her findings often didn't stand up to real-world factors. I prepared a detailed assessment, pointing out every error, every omitted citation, every instance where practical application would directly contradict her theory. Dr. Fitzgerald was mortified. He couldn't believe he'd missed all of it. Then I found something worse, whole paragraphs copied word for word from obscure Russian periodicals. Not enough for a standard plagiarism checker to flag, but more than enough to terminate a career. I documented absolutely everything, attached it all to an email to Dr. Fitzgerald, and expressed my profound concern about academic honesty. He called me immediately. The review board convened that very week. Sophia was called in, probably assuming it was about her upcoming defense. Instead, they showed her my findings. She tried to claim the parallels were coincidence, but I had found 15 instances across 5 publications. Her funding was withdrawn immediately. She had 1 week to clear out her office. Leo contacted me in a panic. Sophia was having a breakdown, sobbing that someone had sabotaged her. She couldn't even guess who it was. She'd alienated most of the other graduate students by constantly revising their work. Leo, bless his heart, asked if I could help. Despite everything, I answered, of course, and brought over cookies and tea. Sophia's office smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. The room was tiny, barely larger than a closet, with bookcases overflowing and papers stacked in disorganized heaps. She was slumped over her desk, face buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling. The tea I'd brought sat undisturbed beside her laptop, steam curling softly into the air. I sat on the hard plastic chair across from her and just watched her cry. My heart was thumping so fiercely I could feel it in my throat. She kept saying the same things, over and over. How could someone have set her up? The plagiarism findings were impossible. She'd never stolen anything in her life. I nodded, making sympathetic sounds, my hands clutching my knees beneath the desk. Every time she glanced up at me with those red, bulging eyes, I had to work hard to keep my expression worried instead of, well, happy. This was exactly what I had hoped for, the result of weeks of meticulous planning and preparation. But sitting there, watching her world crumble, felt different than I'd anticipated. Not a horrible different, just curious. She wiped her nose with a tissue and started reading the review board's conclusions again. I leaned closer, pretending to assist her, pointing at her computer screen as if I could help uncover a flaw in their logic, pretending to read the very document I had written. She asked if I noticed anything wrong with their findings. I told her they seemed quite comprehensive. Her face crumpled again, and she rested her head in her hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket while Sophia continued to weep. I pulled it out. Leo's name flashed on the screen. The message asked if Sophia had said anything about who could have reported her. I gazed at the words for a long time, a chilly sensation spreading through my gut. He had no idea. He was messaging his fiancée for information while I sat across from his friend, whose career I had just utterly wrecked. I responded that she was too emotional to speak clearly, which wasn't a lie, and asked him to give her some space while the inquiry was ongoing. He replied with a worried face emoji, saying he'd check in with her tomorrow. I put down my phone and looked at Sophia, who was staring blankly at her computer screen. She questioned whether I thought Leo would still want to be her buddy after all this. I assured her that of course he would, and that this didn't affect who she was as a person. The words felt empty, yet she seemed to find some consolation in them. She thanked me for coming over and said she didn't know what she'd do without my help right now. I stayed for another 30 minutes, making her more tea, listening to her lament about her research and how many years of work had been utterly squandered. When I finally left, she hugged me at the door and told me I was a great friend. The following week passed in a strange haze. Leo kept sending me updates on Sophia, how she wasn't returning his calls or texts, how concerned he was about her. He claimed she had always been proud, and this must be hurting her terribly. I agreed, saying she simply needed time to comprehend things. We were sitting on his couch one Wednesday night when he mentioned it again, asking whether he should drive over to her place and check on her. I warned him it might make matters worse, that she was probably too humiliated to face anyone from her previous life right now. He nodded but kept checking his phone as if she might suddenly reply. On Thursday, he inquired if I had heard from her, to which I replied, no. Friday, he wondered aloud whether he should have seen the clues that something was amiss with her study. I bit my tongue and informed him that he wasn't a theoretical physicist. Therefore, he couldn't have known. He seemed relieved by this and dismissed the issue. By Saturday, He was frequently asking me whether I believed she'd be all right if academic fraud was something that could be recovered from, if her career was truly ended, or if she could start over again. I had to sit there and pretend I was equally worried about her well-being, nodding and saying encouraging things, all while feeling a strange combination of triumph and guilt. The guilt astonished me. I expected to be completely satisfied, to bask in the glow of victory. But I kept picturing her face in that small office. The way her hands shook when she presented me the review board's conclusions. Monday morning, I returned to the research lab, trying to concentrate on my actual work. Julia, a colleague, spotted me in the break room at 10 a.m., pouring my third cup of coffee. She leaned on the counter, asking if I was all right. I assured her everything was fine, but she kept gazing at me with a worried frown. She remarked I appeared different recently, more confident, but also more guarded, as if I was holding something back. I brushed it off, explaining that work had been tough. Then she asked if everything was all right with Leo. That question hit me differently than I had expected. My grin froze on my face. It was as if a dam broke inside me, and the floodgates of realization opened. All this time, I'd been so focused on Sophia, on making her pay. But what had all of this revealed about my relationship? Leo, my partner of 3 years, had trusted Sophia above me. He had questioned my IQ, my skill, my capacity to grasp fundamental ideas in my own profession. He'd done it so effortlessly, so rapidly. 3 years of knowing me seemed to count for so little compared to Sophia's whispered insinuations. I realized I hadn't absorbed any of that until now. I'd been so intent on hurting Sophia that I hadn't considered why Leo was so willing to assume I was too stupid for him. Julia was still waiting for a response. I finally managed. Things with Leo are complex right now. She asked if I wanted to talk about it, but I declined. She squeezed my shoulder and returned to her desk. That night, Leo arrived at my flat with takeaway. We ate on the couch watching a documentary about deep sea animals. Halfway through, he paused it and looked at me with a serious gaze. He stated he had been thinking a lot about Sophia's comments about our intellectual compatibility. My gut dropped, but my expression remained neutral. He went on to explain that he was beginning to question if he had treated me unfairly. I questioned what he meant by unfair. He squirmed uncomfortably and mentioned some of Sophia's observations concerning my difficulty with complex topics. Maybe they weren't true, he mused. Perhaps I had only been seeing what she wanted me to see. I could feel rage swelling in my chest like fire. He was only questioning his actions now because Sophia had vanished, because he couldn't support her story any longer. Not because he noticed the problem himself. Not because he reflected on it and realized how offensive his behavior had been, but because his source of knowledge had vanished. I inquired whether he truly thought I struggled with abstract topics. He paused, saying he didn't realize Sophia had been persuading him. The rage became hotter, burning through me. I inquired whether he recalled our talk about consciousness and Mars exploration. He nodded. I asked whether it appeared superficial to him at the time, until Sophia informed him it was. He seemed uneasy and confessed it hadn't. I placed down my half-eaten meal and stood up. Leo inquired where I was going, and I told him, nowhere. I just needed to relocate. I stepped to the window and gazed down at the parking lot. The conclusion appeared in my mind, fully formed, as if it had been waiting there all along. I turned around and said, I need to tell you something. He also put down his meal and sat forward, his eyes fixed on me. I gently recounted how I had evaluated Sophia's research for Dr. Fitzgerald, discovered the plagiarism, and documented everything that led to her being booted out of the PhD program. The words came out steadily and clearly, almost clinically. I told him about contacting Dr. Fitzgerald about the quantum navigation project that was really a pretense to gain access to her work, and about discovering the plagiarized portions from Russian documents. I revealed how I wrote the review that ended her career. I told him I was the one who reported her to the Academic Integrity Board. Leo's face became absolutely white. He looked at me as if I had just informed him I'd committed murder. The stillness between us seemed to last forever. Finally, he questioned, his voice low, but I could detect the astonishment underlying it. Why would you do something so terrible? I moved back to the couch and sat down, leaving some distance between us. I reminded him of the router incident, when he questioned if I knew what I was doing or whether I was simply lucky. I mentioned the code review, in which he verified my work with Sophia despite the fact that I had been programming for longer than she had. I mentioned the workplace party where she told his boss I was merely a lab worker and laughed at the thought that I could have prepared the thermal management report. I detailed the car trip home when he said I could be happy with someone on my level. I recounted every single time he had questioned my IQ based on her falsehoods. Each incident spilled out of my mouth like evidence in a trial. His face became paler with each example. When I finished, he attempted to say something, but I raised my hand. I asked him about the trivia night, the chat in which he agreed that we should give other teams a shot because I had, most likely, just memorized things. He closed his mouth and stared at his hands. He began defending himself, claiming Sophia was compelling, had a PhD, and appeared to be an intellectual authority. I cut him off before he finished. I inquired if my one master's degree wasn't persuasive enough, if my published research papers weren't authoritative enough, and if 7 years of experience in aeronautical engineering wasn't proof enough that I understood abstract ideas. My voice became louder with each inquiry. I asked whether he needed Sophia to tell him I was brilliant, or if he should have figured it out after 3 years of dating me. The pain on his face was clear now. He looked as if I had smacked him. Good. He was now grasping the gravity of what he had done to our relationship. He opened and closed his mouth repeatedly. No words came out. I waited. He eventually admitted he didn't know what to say. Hearing everything laid out like that made him understand how terribly he had screwed up. I informed him it wasn't only that he had messed up. It was how quickly he had been convinced of my incompetence. That a woman he hadn't seen since high school could appear and make him question my basic IQ in just a few weeks. Then Leo wondered if the plagiarism was genuine, or if I had made it up to damage her. The question irritated me so much that I had to take a deep breath before responding. I was truly outraged that he still questioned my professional integrity. I got up, walked to my laptop, opened my email, and retrieved the data I had provided to Dr. Fitzgerald. I showed him the original Russian papers beside Sophia's work. I pointed out the similar paragraphs, the identical phrase patterns, the lifted formulas. I led him through the 15 cases spread across 5 publications. I showed him how she modified just enough words to prevent automatic plagiarism detection, but retained the fundamental concepts and structures without acknowledgement. I made him read the paragraphs himself, compare them line by line. I observed his expression as he realized her deception was genuine, that I hadn't made anything up, that I'd just done my job as a reviewer and discovered what was genuinely there. He sat back and placed his hands over his face. He apologized, saying he should never have questioned whether I was making it up. I closed my laptop and informed him that the plagiarism was genuine, but it didn't change why I'd sought for it in the first place. We spent the next 4 hours discussing everything. Leo apologized again, stating he had no idea how he had let himself be twisted like that. He stated that he had become caught up in Sophia's confidence and his own insecurities over not having a PhD himself. He admitted that he had always believed he wasn't smart enough, that his consulting job was inferior to his research. Sophia had played straight into that dread. She'd made him feel like he belonged to an elite intellectual club by agreeing with her judgment of me. I listened to everything and tried to figure out if I could forgive someone who was so quick to dismiss me as incompetent. Part of me realized that insecurity causes people to do dumb things, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about how swiftly he'd turned against me and accepted her story. He inquired what I was thinking, and I said that I didn't know yet. I stated that I needed time to analyze everything and determine whether trust could be reestablished following an event like this. He nodded, saying he understood and would wait as long as I needed. We sat at opposite ends of the couch. The documentary was still on pause on the television, and the takeaway containers on the coffee table between us were cold. I left Leo's residence after midnight and drove home with my hands trembling on the wheel. The exchange kept playing in my thoughts. He had gazed at me as if he saw me for the first time in months. When I returned to my flat, I sat on the couch in the dark for an hour, trying to digest everything. The next morning, I texted Leo, saying I wanted some space to think about us. He answered right away, asking how much time I needed, and I honestly told him I didn't know. He arrived at my door that evening carrying 3 boxes, his face pale and exhausted. He'd packed up his belongings from my flat without asking. I watched him bring his spare work clothes from my closet, his extra toiletries from the bathroom, and the book he'd been reading off my nightstand. He moved slowly and cautiously, as if he didn't want to disrupt anything. When he was completed, he appeared at my doorway with both boxes, asking whether this was what I wanted. I told him that was just what I needed right now. He nodded and departed without disputing. After he left, I wandered through my flat, noting all the empty spots where his belongings had been. The bathroom counter appeared larger without his electric razor. The closet featured a space where his coats used to hang, but somehow the place seemed more like mine than it has in months. I felt as if I'd been sharing it with someone who didn't actually see me, and now I could breathe again. 3 days later, I was at work performing simulations when an email from Dr. Fitzgerald popped up. He thanked me for thoroughly reviewing Sophia's study and acknowledged that my attention to detail had been essential. Then he stated how 3 other graduate students had expressed concerns about joint projects they had worked on with Sophia. Apparently, my examination prompted a larger probe of her whole academic career. I sat there gazing at the email for a long time. A part of me felt gratified, as if I had unveiled something that needed to be revealed. But another part of me felt terrible, since I was the one who started it all. Would anybody have discovered the plagiarism if I hadn't gone seeking? If I hadn't been so upset about what she had done to my relationship, would the other students have spoken up? I closed my inbox and tried to concentrate on work, but I couldn't stop thinking about how a single evaluation had derailed someone's entire career. Julia spotted me at my desk at 7 p.m. on Friday after work. I was staring at simulation data that I didn't understand. She asked if I wanted to have drinks, and I answered yes without thinking. We ended up at a pub near the lab where we'd previously had team happy hours. Julia inquired about what was going on, since I had been acting strangely all week. I hadn't intended to tell anyone the entire tale, but it all spilled out. Sophia's undermining of me, Leo's belief in her, discovering the plagiarism, doing the academic probe, everything. I anticipated Julia to be startled or even criticize me for what I had done. Instead, she listened carefully and then stated that I had not manufactured anything, but had just highlighted fraud that would have been uncovered soon. She pointed out that Sophia's behavior towards me had been its own form of sabotage, attempting to ruin both my relationship and my boyfriend's respect for my career. Julia said that if the plagiarism was true, Sophia had done it to herself and that I had just discovered it. Hearing someone else say it helped me feel slightly better about the situation. The next Tuesday, Leo texted to see if we could chat again. He explained that he had been thinking a lot about his actions and understood the problem was not only about Sophia. He acknowledged he'd always been frightened by my practical talents and hands-on experience. That vulnerability, he said, made him susceptible when someone came along and claimed that theoretical knowledge was superior. He stated he'd want to discuss more if I was willing. I gazed at the text for an hour before answering. Part of me wanted to dismiss it and move on, but another part needed to know how we got here. I agreed to meet him for coffee on Saturday. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Leo was already seated at a corner table. He had a notepad in front of him, which seemed odd. After we had ordered, he slid the notepad over to me. He jotted down a note of every time he'd questioned my IQ or ability during the previous 7 months. There were many more examples than I realized. He'd asked me whether I was certain about anything technical. He occasionally double-checked my work. Conversations in which he explained what I already understood. Some of them I had entirely forgotten about since they appeared little at the time. But seeing them all written down together revealed a pattern that had begun long before Sophia arrived. She had not caused the situation. She simply made things worse. I went over the entire list, feeling the anguish and rage rise up again. Leo watched me and said nothing until I finished. Then he asked whether I believed we could repair it, or if the damage was too severe. We spent the next 4 hours discussing our relationship's foundation and if it had ever been as strong as I had imagined. Leo said that he had major insecurity concerns about not having a PhD in conducting consulting rather than research. He stated that he had always been concerned that he was not as intelligent as others who worked in theoretical fields. Sophia's discourse about esoteric notions and quantum physics made him feel like he was part of an intellectual club. Agreeing with her evaluation of me was a method for him to demonstrate that he belonged there. I told him that was a bad reason to undervalue someone he purportedly loved. He agreed and stated that he understood it was wrong and that he wanted to concentrate on trusting his own experiences with people rather than simply believing whoever sounded the most confident or had the most credentials. I questioned if he truly believed he could change that tendency, which appeared to be firmly ingrained. He replied he didn't know, but he wanted to try if I was willing to give him the opportunity. I told him I needed more time to consider if I could trust him again after this, whether the fact that he was so quickly convinced I was inept was something I could overcome. We left the coffee shop without making a choice regarding our future. That week, I kept reflecting on everything and decided I needed an outside opinion from someone who knew the professional aspect of what I'd done. I emailed Michael Jacobs. a former graduate school lecturer with whom I had maintained in touch. I outlined the scenario, how I discovered Sophia's plagiarism when assessing her work for Dr. Fitzgerald, and inquired about the ethics involved. Michael called me the next day rather than responding via email. He listened to the entire tale before saying something that astonished me. He emphasized that exposing academic fraud was an ethical responsibility for anybody who detected it. That, regardless of my personal motives for scrutinizing Sophia's work, discovering and reporting plagiarism was the correct thing to do. He stated that the academic system depends on people being honest about these issues. If I had discovered the scam but not reported it, it would have been an ethical issue. My reasons for studying her research in the first place did not alter the reality that what I discovered was true and needed to be addressed. Talking to Michael made me feel less bad about the entire situation. 2 weeks after Leo moved out, I received an email that made my stomach drop. It came from Sophia. The subject line simply stated, "I know it was you." I nearly erased it without reading it, but curiosity won out. The email was not furious as I had feared. Instead, it felt dejected and melancholy. She'd worked out my relationship to Dr. Fitzgerald, most likely by reading his emails after things fell apart. She stated that she now recognized that I was the one who evaluated her work and discovered all of the errors. Then she said something that astonished me. She said the plagiarism was true, but she'd convinced herself that the parallels to the Russian articles were accidental because the concepts appeared clear to her. However, when all 15 cases were shown together, she was unable to deny it. She said she'd become lazy and sloppy, taking shortcuts since she was behind on her research schedule. She knew it was wrong, but she had convinced herself that it wasn't too horrible. The email concluded with her stating that she did not blame me for reporting it because it was the truth. I read that email 3 times to determine how I felt about it. Part of me anticipated her to be angry and accusing. Her accepting and acknowledging her own deceit was more difficult to absorb. I did not reply to Sophia's email, but I forwarded it to Leo. He needed to recognize that his friend was both a fake and someone who purposefully wanted to kill our relationship. He phoned me 10 minutes after I sent it, his voice trembling. He started apologizing, claiming he had seen what had occurred, that Sophia had exploited him while being intellectually dishonest the entire while. He stated he felt stupid for not recognizing it sooner and for trusting her over me. I told him I appreciated his apologies, but I still didn't understand what it meant for us. We spent another hour discussing everything that had transpired. At the end of the conversation, Leo asked if I wanted to try couples counseling. He stated that he understood we had severe trust and communication issues that he couldn't resolve on his own, that if we were to save our relationship, we needed professional help to figure things out. I was shocked he proposed it, as Leo had always been suspicious of therapy, but I decided to try it because I wasn't ready to give up on us. We began visiting a therapist the next week. The first session felt awkward and unpleasant. We sat on opposite ends of this beige couch, attempting to explain what had brought us there. The therapist asked several questions regarding our relationship history and specific situations with Sophia. She assisted us in identifying trends that we had both overlooked. Over the course of the following sessions, she pointed out that Leo's worry about his education and profession had caused him to overestimate theoretical knowledge and academic credentials while undervaluing actual experience. That dynamic had left our relationship open to someone like Sophia, who portrayed herself as intellectually superior. The therapist also helped me reflect on my own actions, how I chose retribution over tackling the matter openly, and how I contributed to Sophia's impression of me as less intellectual instead of sticking up for myself earlier. She stated, we both needed to focus on communication and trust if we wanted to rebuild anything meaningful. Leo began addressing his insecurity issues and learning to respect diverse types of intellect and skill. I concentrated on being more open about my emotions rather than allowing bitterness to fester until I did something destructive. It was a painstaking process, and some sessions were quite difficult, with both of us becoming defensive or upset. But things eventually began to improve between us. 3 months passed, and things with Leo improved but changed. We communicated more about how we felt rather than assuming we understood each other. When I was wounded by anything he said, I informed him immediately rather than allowing it to build up. When he felt uneasy about his career or our relationship, he expressed it to me directly rather than taking it out on me in strange, oblique ways. However, there was a new level of caution between us that had not before existed, as if we were both looking for signals that the other person might mistrust us again. I found myself occasionally waiting to see whether he would dispute my decision on something. And I could see he was doing the same thing, waiting to see if I was upset or plotting anything. It wasn't necessarily awful, just different from the easy trust we used to enjoy. We were creating something more honest, but it required more effort and focus than previously. My employer summoned me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. I assumed I had made a mistake during the satellite component testing, but instead she informed me that I was being promoted to senior engineer. The role included a considerable increase in salary and my own team to oversee the next generation navigation systems project. I sat there surprised, because I had been so concentrated on the issues with Leo and Sophia that I hadn't even known the promotion cycle was underway. My employer stated it was an easy decision because my published research and technical contributions over the previous year had been superb. I thanked her and walked back to my desk, feeling a strange combination of pride and relief. That night, when I informed Leo about the promotion, he instantly hugged me and told me how pleased he was of me. He insisted on throwing me a celebratory dinner that weekend, inviting all of our friends and a few of his coworkers. At the meal, he started informing people about my research papers and technical knowledge without my asking. He identified particular projects I had worked on and explained why they were significant. It seemed like a test we were both passing, with him demonstrating his appreciation for my efforts and me allowing him to enjoy my accomplishment without questioning whether he had hidden reasons. A few weeks later, Julia approached me at work over lunch. She had an uneasy expression on her face and stated that she had heard something about Sophia through academic networks. She seems to have dropped out of the PhD program entirely, rather than simply taking a break. She'd returned to her hometown in Ohio to work for her family's commercial real estate firm. Julia said she believed I should know because the situation had been so chaotic. When I heard the news, I felt a confused knot in my gut. Part of me felt relieved that Sophia had suffered serious repercussions for her deceit and attempt to harm my relationship. She'd been revealed as a fraud and lost the career she'd been so proud of. But another part of me was uneasy with how totally her life had fallen apart. I had discovered actual plagiarism and poor research. That was true, but I did it with the intention of hurting her because of what she had done to me. The magnitude of her collapse, losing all she had worked for and having to quit academia altogether, felt heavier than I had anticipated. I thanked Julia for informing me and returned to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. Leo and I discussed Sophia's condition that weekend. I told him what Julia had said and acknowledged feeling awkward about it. He explained why I'd done what I did and how Sophia had brought the consequences on herself via her own dishonesty. But he also mentioned that he understood I was probably confused about being the one who started it. We agreed to keep working on our relationship, to stay together, and to continue going to therapy, to create something more honest than what we had before. What occurred had affected both of us. I realized now that I was capable of premeditated retribution, of plotting and carrying out someone's demise in a very intentional manner, which was an unsettling realization about myself. Leo was aware that he was capable of betraying someone he loved, not through purposeful malice, but through weakness and insecurity, as well as allowing others to distort his perceptions. We were creating something more authentic than the comfortable rhythm we used to share. It was harder effort and less comfortable, but it seemed more solid, as if we understood who we were now and chose one another. Nevertheless, despite our flaws and ability to damage each other, the fatigue was still present. However, there was something deeper. It's a strange kind of peace built on the ashes of what once was. We're still navigating this new landscape, trying to understand how two people can come so close to destroying each other and still choose to build something stronger. Have you ever faced a moment where you realized the person you loved didn't truly see you, and what did you do about it? Let me know in the comments below.